Mini episode 1554 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to FDH Lounge mini episode 1554. This is FDH managing partner Rick Morris coming at you, and a real treat breaking down baseball here. This is the most regular baseball panel that we have had the last couple of years. Here's sort of a throwback to the old Life's a Pitch with Ken Detwiler days at the old Sports Talk Network. This is a three-way panel that we have done. And generally, we would have done the World Series preview and review as well, but Steve Kallas graciously making way for his podcast partner, Joe Stazak, to come in. Stazak being a Philly guy, we were able to get his analysis on the Phillies going into and coming out of the World Series. So I definitely wanted to do this panel. Ken Detwiler, Steve Kallas, and I dare say, I'm just going to go right out there and say it. I don't think you're going to find a better three-man panel to talk baseball anywhere, and it's always a pleasure and privilege to get these guys in here. And I alluded to, of course, the show where I started as a sidekick at the old Sports Talk Network, Life's a Pitch with Ken Detwiler, along with our friend, the late, great Don Coster. My good friend, Ken Detwiler, coming in to talk baseball. We're going to be doing a little bit of a review of the season, just sort of thoughts from 50,000 feet. We're not going to get super in-depth, but we'll touch on some things from both leagues and the early part of the off-season here, the Hot Stove League. So Ken Detwiler, always a great guy to do that with. My friend, how you doing, Kenny D?
I'm doing great, and it's great to have Steve back in the saddle with us again. And he was missed, but I just, like I mentioned before we got on the air here, Rick, this is like Christmas for me. You've got the winter meetings coming up. You've got a real hot stove season this year, which we haven't had in years. And we've got the Hall of Famer people that are going to be put into the Hall of Fame here. So, and I've got my people with that too. But let's just get after it.
Oh, absolutely. And you're right. Having the CBA being instituted this year, it gave us the certainty going forward that we didn't have the last couple of years for the Hot Stove League. Now we know what the economic system is going to be the next couple of years. Now we are past all the COVID issues that were around in 2020 and 2021 and some that lingered into this year. And hopefully even the ones that were there this year won't be a part of next year. But for all of that and much, much more, our good friend Steve Kallas, of course, from the Kallas Remarks podcast with Joe Stazak, of course, WestchesterCountyPost.com sports editor. Always a pleasure to get you back in, Steve. Thanks so much for being here.
Hey, it's a pleasure for me to be with you two guys as always. Really looking forward to it.
And at the outset here, let's not waste any time. You mentioned off air here that you had a very interesting story that you wanted to get to, and you didn't even want to tip any details to Ken and myself. So I have no idea where you're going, which just makes it all the more fun to anticipate what this is going to be.
I'm directing your attention to September 27th, 2022, a day that will live in infamy, in my opinion, where Marlins pitcher Richard Blyer was called for 3 balks in 1 at-bat against the New York Mets at Citi Field. Jeff McNeil was on first. Blyer was pitching to Pete Alonso. Got to be careful with him. And the first base umpire, John Tumpane, Tumpane, whose name I think will live in infamy, called on 3 consecutive pitches, 3 consecutive balks. McNeil scored from first. I don't think Pete Alonso gets an RBI, but it was the strangest thing I've ever seen. It's never happened before, and I say it'll never happen again. And this was the old didn't come to a full stop rule. And the didn't come to a full stop rule has been messed with for decades and decades. Yeah. And I watched them, and I even watched the replay earlier today of the Met announcers, and they were like, well, maybe it was a balk, but I've seen a lot worse than that. And it just got ridiculous. As you may recall, Mattingly and Blyer got thrown out of the game because you can't argue a balk like you can't argue a called strike. And I just want to say one thing about the balk rule, and I know Coach Detwiler will get a kick out of this. So when I was a little kid, I was a junk balling left-hander. As my father, minor league catcher for 2 years before he went into World War II, would say, Steve, your best pitch is your pickoff move. And that was no knock on me. I couldn't throw hard. I had a great curveball. The pickoff move was really my second best pitch. But the rule of the balk is intended to, quote, prevent the pitcher from deceiving the runner and potentially picking him off. Now, both of you guys know the exact reason is you're 100% trying to deceive the runner. Otherwise, you'd never pick anybody off. So it was always a stupid rule from the get-go. This guy, in his 304th Major League Baseball appearance, had never been called for a balk. He pitched in the league 7 or 8 years, 308 appearances, and he was called for 3 balks in one at-bat. Forget one inning or one game, in one at-bat. I say that'll never happen again, and I'll say it's one of the dumbest things I've ever seen in baseball.
Well, Counselor, I'm gonna ask this in the form of a question, so I can't be hit for defamation. But would it be improper for me to wonder if perhaps this ump, maybe in these days of a proliferation of gambling, might have had a prop bet on Jeff McNeil scoring a run that night and just wanted to make sure? So I mean,
I don't know if it went that far. And the joke of it all is, so Jeff McNeil scored. He made the game 6-4, and this was when the Mets were collapsing, as you both know. But he gave up that run. It was 6-4, and the Marlins won the game 6-4.
I mean,
so if he was, Rick, if he was getting down, unless he had that specific Jeff McNeil scores a run, he got beat.
Well, that is incredible, and I got to ask you, Ken. Because, look, if you'd have put a gun to my head and said, guess where Steve's going with this, I would have had to say, pull the trigger. I can't imagine you would have had that one guessed as far as where he was going.
No way. I found out I have a kindred soul with Steve because I had forgot that he was a lefty, and I was kind of a lefty, just a taller version jump ball pitcher. I would emulate Ted Abernathy, sidearm, when there was lefties coming up. And then I would do Juan Marichal when I would just try to do all kinds of, as my grandkids would call me, trickeration, just to get through. But you're absolutely right, Steve. As soon as the guy got on base, I would love to walk the guy rather than pitch to him because I could pick him off. I got a couple moves. And so your dad was right.
Well, the funny thing is about the commonality between us here, not a pitcher, and I never made it off of the sandlots of youth baseball, but one of the rarest of birds, a lefty catcher in my case. So 3 lefties here on this show, and very interesting at that here. And I loved anticipating where you were going to go with that, Steve, and it did live up to the anticipation of it, but wanted to take a look.
Me too.
Oh yeah.
And that's unheard of. I can see why it's never happened before, because what was that umpire thinking? What an idiot.
Right.
But
exactly. And so I'm thinking here we'll get some notes from each of the 2 leagues, some general thoughts that we had from this past season. We'll touch on anything you guys want to get into with the postseason awards and the beginning of the Hot Stove League, as far as additionally any predictions that you guys might have with that as well. With the American League, I'll start it off here. A couple of surprises to me. In the Central Division, certainly Cleveland surging the way that they were able to. That was due in large part to 2 colossal disappointments this year, the White Sox and then Detroit. I actually thought this was the year Detroit could step up and make the playoffs. Boy, was I wrong. And there were some other surprises in the American League as well. Boston being a last-place team in the East, didn't see that one coming. Didn't have that on my 2022 bingo card. But Baltimore being a strong 4th-place team, I think I'm going to say this right now, call my shot. This is the beginning of a run for them because They have arguably the best farm system in the game right now, and they started bringing up some of the young guys this year. So Baltimore, I think, was a little bit ahead of schedule, but I think they're going to be able to sustain it. Ultimately, the teams that were in the championship series, Houston and the Yankees, no surprise there. A lot of us probably had that kind of penciled in, but as far as the ups and downs of the teams in the league, things I expected and didn't expect, that was kind of how I saw it. So, Ken, I'll start by throwing it to you. Any thoughts that you had from the American League this year?
Yeah, well, I'm looking. I kind of took a different thing on it.
Okay, good.
A different look, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I saw a couple teams that I'm thinking this coming year, because this is the hot stove season, that, for example, Cleveland, and I'm tooting our own horn over here finally.
Mm-hmm.
The Guardians, 4 Gold Glovers. They've got defense coming back this year. They've got speed. They've got pitching, but they need to pick up a couple people. Baltimore, like you had already alluded to. Boston looks like 5 pounds of poop in a 2-pound bag.
Yes.
Because they've lost 4 out of the last 5 years. They've finished in last place.
Yeah.
In their division. As far as the Toronto Blue Jays, they just brought Mattingly on as a bench coach, which I was like scratching my head and raising an eyebrow and thinking, So these guys must be loading up too. And 2 teams, and then I'll stop here in the Western Division, that I'm really keeping an eye on in 23, and that is the Los Angeles Angels and the Texas Rangers.
Yep.
And I know it's a tough division, but the Mariners in there and the Astros, that's pretty much it. I just really think what the Angels are doing, and I know it's early, Angels and the Rangers, but I think they really can make some noise.
Well, and I tell you, L.A. is a real stars and scrubs town, is it not? You look at the Angels, you look at the Rams, you look at the Lakers. I mean, it's a common motif out there for those franchises to be stars and scrubs. And I said coming into this year, I felt like the Chargers were somewhat of that as well. And I think you're seeing that play out additionally. So yeah. I'm not sure if that's a coincidence or not that all of those teams have that, but the Angels are definitely one of them, no doubt about it. And they continue to be. With high-priced, mega stars, and then, just utter kind of, guano at the bottom of their lineup and roster. But how do you see it this year, Steve, for your thoughts on the American League and anything that really kind of grabbed your attention?
Well, I certainly looked at the Angels and the Rangers before this year, but the reason I eliminated them is the reason you eliminated them for the last few years, and that was pitching. I mean, the Rangers paid a fortune to get that middle infield.
Yep.
And that helped. And the Angels, frankly, you know what the big question is Ohtani going to stay? Ohtani is now on record as saying, I want to win.
Yep.
Can Mike Trout talk Ohtani? And now what I will say is, who's the guy they got from the Nationals? Was it Rendon, I think?
Yes,
the third
Rendon.
baseman from the National.
Yep.
So I thought before the year they'd have the best 2, 3, 4. Trout, Rendon, Ohtani,
Sure.
Trout, Ohtani, Rendon. Probably that way, lefty, righty. But Rendon got hurt and missed virtually the whole year. And Trout, who's still Trout when he came back, but he had that mystery back injury and he missed a lot of time. And some doctors were saying he's not going to play again. And Trout was like, that's ridiculous. And he came back a week later and, winds up hitting 40 home runs because he's Mike Trout. But the only guy in the Angels pitching staff this year who had more than 150 innings pitched last year was Ohtani.
Yeah.
And so they're really gonna. I think I heard the Rangers are in the hunt for DeGrom. And, they seem to have the manager who will pay, the owner who will pay anything, as do the Angels. But the question still right now today, to me, for both of those teams, is will they get the pitching? As far as the Red Sox, I don't know what happened to the Red Sox. I think it might be the ghost of Theo Epstein now that he's been gone, 4 or 5 years or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
There's a question, are they even going to sign Bogarts? If they don't do that, they're just becoming another bad team in a really good division. The thing that was most impressive to me about the Orioles is look at the division that they were in, and they were in the playoff hunt up to the last 2 weeks of the year. So I agree with you, Rick, that they're like a factor to be reckoned with next year.
Yes.
And as for the Indians, I'll just say this. Didn't Francona get manager of the year?
Yes, he did. Deserved it.
That's an incredible job with an incredibly young team, and the arrow's only going to point up for them because they got the right manager. and they got the right young group. And now I think you're right, maybe next year, in a not very good look. I think Tony La Russa, we all thought it was weird because Reinsdorf wanted to bring him back because he made a mistake, 30 years ago?
Right.
No, really, it was like in the 80s.
Yeah.
And that's how he wound up with the Astros, with the Athletics, I think. But he just wasn't fit for the job. He had weird press conferences. I'm sad he's leaving because of health reasons, but I think it's probably a good idea for him to have left. But yeah, I thought Chicago more than Detroit. I root against Detroit because of A.J. Hinch, like I root against the Astros, like I root against Cora. These guys, nobody
root against the Astros.
Yeah.
Nobody paid. Look, nobody paid. I picked the Astros with Joe to win the World Series in 6. I told him I didn't want to do it publicly, but I did because they were the best team. But the notion that they're a dynasty when they had that first one, which would be questionable at best, I think is ridiculous. But in terms of next year, I unfortunately agree with the notion that right now the Astros are the favorite if they sign Verlander, and I guess we'll get into that later when we talk about free agents. But,
Sure.
Pena made everyone forget Carlos Correa. Where's he? He's lost in Minnesota, and now maybe he might go somewhere else. But it was like he didn't exist. This guy played better than Correa. He was the MVP of the World Series and the ALCS, by the way. I don't know how many times that's happened, but this guy was an unbelievable find, who, by the way, hit .253 in the regular season, but was totally the MVP of the entire playoffs and the MVP of the World Series.
Yeah, he had an incredible run there, no question about it. Turning to the National League, it's been looking at this, I felt like maybe there were slightly less surprises than in the American League. I think that everybody knew, coming into the year in one form or fashion that the Braves and Mets would be 1-2 in the East and fighting it out for a chance to go deep into the playoffs. I think what would be a surprise is if you would have said the third place team, the Phillies, will be the ones to win the pennant, but that ended up playing out. And I did get an obligatory note in during our World Series preview that I'm sure you were probably disapproving. Steve Kallas, that team that was third place in its own division, ended up winning a pennant. So I gave you a shout out for what I was assuming was your take. The rest of the league, the only real surprise to me was the Dodgers distancing themselves from the rest of the league to the extent that they did. 111 wins. 110 plus is very rare in baseball history. The Dodgers, every year, the last at least 5 or 6 years, with the way that they have really loaded up on talent, that they, probably going back to 2017 at least when they won the pennant that year, that the Dodgers have a chance to have a year like that. It just so rarely happens. Now, the year before, I think it was like 106 wins, but still second in the West to San Francisco. But the degree to which they distanced themselves from the rest of the league, a little bit of a surprise to me. It ends up being all for naught in the playoffs there, as they can't even get past little brother San Diego, who ends up taking them out. So I'll start with you again here, Ken. Your thoughts on an interesting year in the National League?
Yeah. Again, I'll start with the Central, and I'll go. I'm just going to pick the Cardinals because there's nobody else that's got the kids. It's like little leaguers playing. The Cubs, the Reds, the Brewers. What in God's name are the Brewers doing? I mean,
yeah,
I scratch my head almost weekly about that kind of stuff. I mean, these guys are just. I mean, I'm sure they've got their ideas and they've got everything, a lot more stats than I ever thought about. But I'm sitting here thinking, my gosh, they're getting rid of good ball players, and the Pirates are the Pirates. So, I mean, here again, just put them in there, and now you got a 5-team division. But Cardinals in that division. In the East, I'm looking at the Braves, and the Phillies. But are the Phillies going to even come back? I see weaknesses there too. The Marlins are the Marlins until they play the Indians and win a couple World Series. And then the Nationals, I mean, they're bottom feeders now too, just like the old Washington teams used to be, way back 50, 60, 70 years ago. Washington's always been like, except for a rare occasion. And the Mets, can anybody tell me what is wrong with the Mets? They spend, and then they've won, believe me, more World Series than Cleveland has ever done in recent memory. But are they just jinxed? Are they just, they root, their fans are great, But, geez, at the end of the day, it's like, hey, we have some lovely parting gifts for you guys. Thank you.
I question that. I question how the roster kind of fits together because, they have gotten an owner, and I am jealous of this. They did finally get an owner that'll spend money, but it's a thing where just going out and you get the available pieces, right? It's whoever's available at a given time, but I just wonder how the roster construction kind of goes and if it's a little bit of stars and scrubs there as well with them. Maybe not as much as some teams, certainly not nearly as much as the Angels, but I think there's a little bit of it there. And I will say this, the Central Division in both leagues, I think the technical term is an oven full of boiling caca because it's just the worst, the dirt worst. It's just the Central in both leagues is embarrassing. It's just I don't know what's going to happen to change that next year. Probably not much, maybe a little bit around the margins, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Steve, or certainly I know you will for the National League as a whole.
Well, I think Ken's right about the Cardinals because whatever they have in that division to trot out Goldschmidt and Arenado back-to-back, I mean, they might be the best 1-2 combination in the major leagues based on performance this year. They were actually both MVP candidates.
Yes.
Even though Goldschmidt, I think, deserved it and won it. So whatever else happens there, I think those two guys are good enough to carry them next year. And I think Wainwright's coming back for another year. I think I read that somewhere. And, he was okay this year. They set that record for all-time battery mates, right? So I think the Cardinals are locked there. I want to talk briefly about the Dodgers because the last 5 times the Dodgers have set their all-time winning record in the season, including this season, and it goes back to 1972, I want to say, when they lost to the A's in the World Series. That was the beginning of the A's winning 3 in a row. Yeah. The last 5 times they've set their record for most wins in a season, they have not won the World Series.
Wow.
So just based on that alone, I did that with Joe, I think, when I found that out right before the playoffs started. But they just didn't deserve it, in my opinion. I still think Clayton Kershaw, at best, is an average postseason pitcher. They lost Buehler, I think, to an arm injury.
Yep.
So I wasn't shocked when they lost. As for the Mets, and I'll say this, Ken, as a Yankee fan, when you're in New York, you just say, it's the same old Mets. It's the Mets. What do you expect? It's the Mets. And I said on the air, if DeGrom is healthy and Scherzer is healthy, that they can win the whole thing. But yet they couldn't win in that 3-game Atlanta Braves set like the week before the season ended when they had the monumental collapse. And, oh, by the way, they couldn't win in the playoffs either. So if you have those studs losing, and this assumes I don't even know if DeGrom's coming back. We'll talk about that later, I guess. But as for the Mets, to us, they're just the Mets. And now Lindor did have a Lindor year finally after being terrible the year before. And the guy was like 4th in the National League in RBI, or in the major leagues in RBIs. I mean, give him credit. Maybe it took him a year. You come to New York, it's a different deal, as you guys know. But I think Ken is right. They're loaded with talent, and then you go, what happened?
Well, they took it. I mean, Steve and Rick, the Mets, I've never seen a collapse like this in a long, long time. I mean, my gracious, they went wire to wire until it was like, now we have to play for something. I don't know what happened there. I mean, can anybody explain that to me?
Yeah, the explanation is they're the Mets. That's the explanation in New York. I can tell you that.
Okay, you did tell me that just a little bit ago, actually.
Ken.
And I will say, if I could say about the Phillies, Joe Girardi, 22 and 29, a guy who, ran out his welcome, I think, in Chicago, right, after 1 year or something. I mean, I never thought he was a great manager with the Yankees. I thought he was fortunate. They bought the World Series in 2009. I'll be the first to admit that. They got CC Sabathia and Teixeira and the other good pitcher. I can't remember who it was, but they bought that World Series. And now I think Aaron Boone is the same way. I don't think he's great shakes. Meanwhile, Rob Thompson's a lifer. He was Girardi's right-hand man with the Yankees for all those years. And to give him the opportunity, I was so happy. But you are right about me, Rick. 87 wins. 3rd place. I remember the year the Mets were 83 and 79, 1973.
Yeah.
They were 83 and 79, 4 games over 500, and they took the Athletics to Game 7 of the World Series.
Yeah.
So I'm just not cool with those things. Once upon a time, if you were 83 and 79, they say, you're above 500, go get them next year.
Yeah.
Or even the Phillies today, 87, so they were 6, they were 12 games over 500. That's pretty good. You came in third. You can build on that for next year. But the way it is now, and this is all about money, my complaint about both leagues will be they added the team to the playoffs. And this is all about money.
Well, yeah.
And I hate that. And we have to look. It's in football now. I was watching the Still Alive and the whatever AFC East, and they had guys with 4-7 records.
Right.
Here's a newsflash to me. If you're 4-7,
right,
you shouldn't be able to make the playoffs, even if you win your last 6. There should be a rule. Of course, there'll never be, but it's always NBA is worse, 7 through 10. No, if we can only get to the 10th spot, anything can happen. No, anything can happen,
right,
especially in the NBA. But
right.
I digress. But that's, congratulations to Rob Thompson. And, it's the best team at the end of the year
right.
now. And once upon a time when it was just 2 pennant winners, it was, you could argue it was just playing better than
right.
but it was 2 pennant winners. If you lost the World Series, you had a good year.
Well, and I'll say this, too, Ken. This ought to be understandable to you about the Mets. Because what was said about the Mets, same old Mets, I mean, same old Browns, right? We should understand same old in this town, being on the North Coast. It's the same old Browns as well. So, that's an understandable concept, I believe. All right, thoughts on the postseason awards? Anything that really kind of jumped out? I'll start with you this time, Steve.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to talk about Jeff McNeil. I love Jeff McNeil. He's a real hustle player. He's a real good player. But on the last day of the season, he's decided to sit out because he was ahead of Freddie Freeman. I think Freddie Freeman was like 320, 321. Jeff McNeil was 326. But they literally showed him watching at bats. He watched Freddie Freeman go 1 for 1, 2 for 2, 3 for 3, and then he was getting worried because he might have to, if he goes 4 for 4, he's got to get in the bat. But Freeman, and I think he hit a long fly ball to deep center, by the way. I saw the at-bat. It was almost a home run, but he went 3 for 4, so Jeff McNeil did not have to bat. I thought it was Bush League. We always heard the legendary Ted Williams, 1941. His average was 399.6. So if he stopped that last doubleheader, he would have hit 400. He played both games of the doubleheader. He went 4 for 5 in the first game and 2 for 3 in the second. They took him out in the 8th inning. So he went 6 for 8, and that's why he hit 406.
Yeah.
So I kind of look at it, and again, I love Jeff McNeil, but I will say this. I looked up Freeman. The 3 games before he went 3 for 4, he was 0 for 12. So he must have been ahead of McNeil by 5 or 6 or 8 points. So maybe if he had sat out the last 4 games, he would have won the batting title. And I just think that's a bad way to win it. The only other thing I want to comment on postseason is the notion that Shohei Ohtani should somehow have been considered to get the MVP award over Aaron Judge was a total joke. Love Ohtani. He's doing things that nobody but Babe Ruth ever did, and you can argue he's doing them better now than Babe Ruth ever did because when he went to the Yankees, he obviously became solely a hitter and not a pitcher. One of the best lefties of all time if you look at his World Series marking as a lefty for the Red Sox. But Ohtani should maybe get the MOP. He got the MVP last year. They won like 73 games. He got 2 first-place votes this year. Judge got the other 28. And they won 79 games this year. So I'm sorry, to me, you can't be the MVP of the league. And you can tell me about Ernie Banks. I get it. They were terrible. But he was the MOP. He wasn't the MVP. You can tell me about A-Rod on the Texas Rangers. He was the MOP. He shouldn't have gotten the MVP. And I think Ohtani last year, as great as he was, maybe you can give it to him last year because it was such a strange thing. But this year, when a guy like Judge has the season that he had, there should have been no talk about Shohei Ohtani. Although I'll say it again, what he's doing is beyond incredible.
I do honestly believe both of those guys, Judge and Ohtani. I would have given it to Judge, but I think it's a shame that either one of them had to lose it because I think both of them had absolutely historic type seasons here. Ken, any thoughts on your part about the postseason awards?
Well, I'm going to differ a little bit about Ohtani because, as we all agree, he's doing stuff that we'll never, ever see again.
True.
And we've never seen before.
Yes.
At this caliber. And so he's the MVP in my mind. I'm not trying to start any trouble here or anything. I'm just saying it the way I look at it. Who's better? And I know Judge had a tremendous year. So, but I'll go back to the Cleveland Guardians, and it pains me to say that, but one thing they had 6 people nominated for Gold Gloves.
Right.
4 of them received the Gold Glove. They had the youngest team ever in the major leagues. again, Francona has been awesome. They ought to build a statue for him when he leaves here in Cleveland. If you want to forget about the Indians, and a lot of people are still chewing on that bone here in Cleveland, and Cleveland fans around the country, that you can forget about them. At the first year that they're called the Guardians, they go into the playoffs and take the Yankees on and beat the Tampa Bay Rays. And it's just like, wow. But they need to add some sticks. I think they still have banjo hitters up and down their line.
Absolutely. Stephen Kwan. I got more power than Stephen Kwan, Ken Detwiler.
Yeah, but I don't know if he ended up getting more hits than Kenny Lofton did in his first year or not.
Yeah, he did.
But
he did, but I think there's only room for one Slappy in the outfield, so I think Miles Straw is going to have to give ground there. I think they're going to end up moving Kwan, and Kwan won't be as good in center field, but the difference by getting a legitimate bat in left field, I think, is what they're going to need. So we'll see.
They need some sticks. I was hoping they would get, and that's why I like the Angels, because they picked up Hunter Renfroe.
Yeah.
They need a stick, and they need an outfielder. Miles Straw, please. They gave him a raise.
I know. Where
do I have I've got to have my hand out. I want a raise too.
Well,
come on. You're going to pay me for nothing.
Well, here's a nice inside reference, Ken. Hopefully you can do some lobbying from within here, okay? And maybe I try and get some results. You'll be my hero if you can. If you can have any effects there on lobbying from within.
I'll see.
Yeah.
I'll see your favorite owner here around Christmas time again. So
that whole story about you picking up the check is one of the greatest things I've ever heard in my life. That is still one of my favorites of all time, and I won't repeat it here.
Hey Dolan, don't. I got the check here. Give us a stick. Okay?
that is just amazeballs. That's one of my favorite stories ever. As we start to bring this full circle, let's take a look ahead to next year, the starts of it here anyways with Hot Stove. I'll stay with you here at the start, Ken. Any early thoughts on Hot Stove League?
I'm hearing that Verlander is talking to, and talk about the Ancient Mariner with Wainwright and these guys. He's talking to the Dodgers.
Yeah.
Which it's kind of another head scratcher. Again, I'm hearing Correa going back to the Cubs, and I'm thinking, really? So, and there's Abreu, there's several ones. And guys, that's what makes this really, really fun for me. And I'm sure you guys, being baseball fans, that you are, and all three of us left-handers.
That's right.
Really, I don't know where that goes, or people can on us. But, I think Cody Bellinger should go to Colorado and get his swing back and get his batting averages up, and then go back as a free agent again. And Michael Brantley, is he going to go to St. Louis, Houston? I mean, this is the fun for me. I don't know about you guys, but I see San Francisco has a pile of money, and I don't think this is going to happen. But wouldn't it be something if Judge did go back out to San Francisco? But he's got to have players around him, though.
Yep. There's been speculation about that. Yeah, there's been constant speculation. I'll believe it when I see it as far as the Yankees getting outbid. I think they're going to come in pretty strong on this.
Yeah.
So we'll bring it around full circle for the segment with you. Steve, any of your thoughts on Hot Stove?
Yeah, well, I'll speak on Judge quickly. He went to San Francisco. He's visited with the Giants, and he's from that area. So I think he was so angry that they offered him a 7-year, I think it was $213 million extension on top of what he was making.
Yeah.
And what he was making, they even had a spitting contest, you'll recall, between the $17 million they wanted to pay him and the $21 million he wanted. And I think they actually settled at 19. If he's one of those guys who holds a grudge, and then he goes out, of course, and hits 62 homers, but really carried the Yankees when they were horrific for that time that they were horrific. But I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. If deep inside he's like, man, I hate this, but New York's New York, he's the king here. And I think you're right, that Ken. I think Ken said that the Yankees will not be outbid, but the question will be, does that matter to Judge? Because now he wanted Trout money apparently before the season, and I would have said he's not worth Trout money. And I don't even know that he's worth Trout money now, but guess what? I think he can demand it off the season he had. And you know how these things are. He's going to be 31 in April. So those 7-8 year contracts he's going to get and want and probably get, you automatically write off the last few years of those contracts. It's like it's like Cabrera. Miggy, love, it's like those contracts. I'd also just want to talk about briefly DeGrom, who will be 35 next June. But DeGrom, and I'll throw Verlander in the same, Verlander's 38. They're both looking at, who are they looking at? Max Scherzer, 3 years, $43 million a year. That's what Verlander's going to be looking for.
Yep.
And I think DeGrom is going to be looking for that, but even more years, because I think Scherzer right now, you can almost count on them better, although Verlander during the regular season was incredible. But as you know, he finally got his first World Series win. In Game 5, he's like 1-6 with a over 5 ERA, and he was terrible in the first game. They got him out of the loss because I think he gave up 5 runs and the game got tied right before Real Muto, I think, hit that home run.
Right.
So I think these guys are going to look for money. We're all old enough to remember. I remember when I was a kid, and you rooted for the players, and I think it was Koufax and Drysdale held out for like $125,000 each. Oh, those greedy pigs! And Joe DiMaggio used to get booed, and Mickey Mantle won the Triple Crown, and they offered him like a $10,000 raise or something. And you just shake your head now if you have a Scherzer worth $43 million. Don't tell me he's worth every penny, because A, they didn't win, and B, I don't think any player is worth $43 million. But guess what? I think Ohtani the following year, when we talk about him, he'll be looking at $50 million a year.
He very well might be. No question about it. If anybody's worth it, he would be. I want to say here, as we go full circle on this, I want to give an RIP to the legendary Gaylord Perry, an FDH Lounge guest, and it's hard to believe. The last of the shows we ever did at the Sports Talk Network, episode 152, Gaylord Perry, Road Warrior Animal, Joe Laurinaitis, Dan Weldon, they've all passed on. It's hard to believe. And Gaylord Perry made it the longest of them, and he was the oldest, I think, by far. So RIP to him. And again, want to thank you both for being a part of this segment here. Ken Detwiler, thank you so much, sir.
You bet. And I wanted to second that with Gaylord Perry. I told you Sam McDowell was my hero, number 48 in your program, number 1 in the hearts of my fans, or his fans, rather. November 29th, 1971, I read a paper in my little town of Seville where I grew up. Frank Duffy, Gaylord Perry traded for Sudden Sam, and I was devastated at the time.
Hard to... But, yeah. I mean, all those years ago, man, but it ended up being a very notable chapter, no question about it, the way that it went down. Great that you brought that up. Steve Kallas, thank you.
Hall of Fame, Gaylord Perry.
Hall of Fame, baby. He was amazing, and what a character. What an amazing character. And I asked him if he ever encountered Dorothy Fuldheim in the locker room when he was here in Cleveland back in the day. A nice North Coast reference, Ken, for those who get it. Yeah. So, yes, there is that.
Hey, Rick?
Yes.
If I could, I got one quick Gaylord Perry story. I'm old enough to have gone to a Met doubleheader in the 60s as a little kid with my father, and that was the time the second game, I think it went 23 innings. And what I remember about that game, 2 things. Willie Mays played short, and a guy came in and pitched 10 innings of shutout ball in relief against the Mets, and we were all like, who the heck is this guy? And 10 years or more later, when Gaylord Perry wrote Me and the Spitter, Perry said, the first time I ever threw a spitball was when I played against the Mets in that extra inning game, and I threw 10 shutout innings. That was the first time I ever threw a spitball. And I was at that game, and it was the second game of a doubleheader, and my father, being the lunatic baseball fan he was, we went there for batting practice, and we stayed for like 32 or 33 innings, whatever it was, for that doubleheader.
Oh, wonderful memory.
Wow. That baseball history
incredible.
Right there. That's thank you for mentioning that. That is an incredible part of baseball history right there that you got to see.
That is.
Yes, and thank you to both of you guys, and certainly thank you to Gaylord Perry for everything that he meant to the game of baseball. And we will be Hopefully here reconvening to do our 2023 preview of the MLB season when the time comes, our annual tribute to our good friend and late broadcast colleague Don Coster. So if not before then, I look forward to convening with you guys then. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for tuning in to FDH Lounge Mini episode 1554.